At Lily's wedding, I accidentally got drunk and fell headfirst into her brother's arms. When I sobered up, I was trembling with dread because he absolutely hated me. After a lengthy internal debate, I decided to apologize and bluff my way through it. "I'm sorry," I said, "I thought I ran into a wall, that's why I acted like that." He let out a cold laugh, unbuttoned his shirt, and revealed a chaotic trail of kiss marks across his chest. "Well, you must been starving," he sneered. "If you thought I was a wall, you sure did a lot of biting and kissing for just a collision." When I told my best friend Lily that I wanted to attend her wedding, she immediately patted her chest and declared, "Leave it to me. I'll give you a surprise." At the time, I thought she was joking. I didn't expect that a month later, she'd actually rush into a flash marriage with the man her family had arranged for her to meet. Also, I could witness an elite, high society wedding firsthand. I scolded her for being too impulsive, but as I stood there admiring the exquisite array of desserts at the wedding, I couldn't deny how excited I felt. After all, Lily was the youngest daughter of the wealthiest family in the city. This wedding was destined to be grand. The venue didn't disappoint. After squeezing out a few symbolic tears of reluctance, I indulged in 3 plates of hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't until I finally looked up from my plate that I saw Lily and her new husband exchanging rings on stage. When he leaned in to kiss her, a pang of melancholy welled up inside me. The sight stirred an inexplicable sadness, prompting me to pour myself 2 more glasses of champagne, forgetting completely that I couldn't handle my alcohol and was an even worse drunk. One glass turned into another, and before the wedding was over, I was thoroughly intoxicated. I stumbled toward the restroom to throw up, but even after I came out, my head was spinning. Dizzy and unsteady, I tilted my head back and wandered aimlessly until I bumped into something. It felt firm and solid. Sturdy, like a wall. Leaning against it felt surprisingly comfortable, so I buried my face into it and drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, I found myself at Lily's house. As my mind slowly pieced itself back together, flashes of last night's events played like a movie in my head. A familiar scowl surfaced in my memory, and I froze. Oh no! The solid wall I had leaned against last night wasn't a wall, it was Nicholas Biddle, Lily's brother, and my boss. After graduating, I landed a job at Lily's family business, thanks to her connections. Initially, I was in a technical role, constantly traveling and attending meetings with Nicholas. But Lily didn't like how busy I was. She complained that I had no time to hang out with her. So, she had her brother transfer me to a cushier, less demanding position. I was thrilled with the change. Less work and more pay? Perfect. Nicholas, on the other hand, was not amused. He made it clear he didn't believe in paying employees to do nothing. Lily, being the spoiled princess she was, didn't care. One day, she slammed her hand on the table and declared, "I'm not letting you bully Nancy. Sign the papers and let her go." Then, turning to me with an air of dramatic flair, she added, "Tonight, we'll celebrate your resignation with 10 male models. Write that resignation letter now." Perhaps worried that his sister might actually go through with her wild threat, Nicholas snapped, "Don't you dare." "Oh, just watch me," Lily shot back defiantly. In the end, Nicholas grudgingly compromised. With an icy expression, he signed the transfer papers instead of my resignation. Since then, he hadn't looked at me with anything resembling kindness. Every time I visited Lily at her house, he'd be there, sitting nearby with a scowl, watching us like a hawk. His gaze made my skin crawl. It was like he was silently condemning me for being an unproductive freeloader. Not that I cared much. After all, I had Lily backing me up. Then there was that one time when Lily decided to address my perpetual single status. She told me it was time to settle down and start a family, and no amount of protesting on my part would change her mind. Under her relentless pressure, Nicholas begrudgingly handed over his friends' profiles, his expression a stormy shade of fury. The truth is, I'd been on my own for a long time. My parents passed away early, and I've spent most of my life fending for myself. I don't have many friends, but Lily has been my rock, the closest thing I have to family. To her, I'm more than just a friend. I'm a sister. And she knows me better than anyone. She knows how deeply I long for a complete family, one that could fill the void left by my parents' absence. It's something she's never stopped worrying about. Even more than I do myself. At first, Lily suggested that I marry her brother, keeping it all in the family. But as soon as she remembered Nicholas's attitude toward me, she scrapped the idea without hesitation. No way. Marrying him would be worse than marrying Joey. At least Joey likes you, she said. Joey was Lily's dog, and admittedly, he adored me. He'd always snuggle into my arms and refuse to leave. Cut it out. Joey's your baby, don't try to pawn him off on me. Jokes aside, Lily earnestly scoured her social circle for eligible bachelors. Among the carefully curated options, I picked the most handsome one and said I wanted to meet him. You've got good taste, Nancy, she exclaimed. This guy's the most handsome out of all my brother's friends. But fair warning, he's a player. He's had a lot of girlfriends, though he's principled. Once he's married, he won't fool around. I waved off her concerns. A man's kindness might be fake, but his good looks, those don't lie. Besides, a handsome husband is a trophy. I'd love to hear people gush, wow, your husband is so gorgeous. I'm shallow like that. On the day of the meeting, Lily got held up with something and told me to head to the venue first. As I approached the private room, I overheard voices from inside. Nicholas' unmistakable drawl caught my attention. So, Nicholas, you know Lily's friend well, right? What's she like? Asked Sean, the bachelor I was supposed to meet. Nicholas' voice was lazy, almost indifferent. Her? She's average. Lazy, clumsy, always oversleeping, procrastinating, crying, and talking too much. She's careless with everything she does. She's not the type your parents would approve of. Sean sighed, sounding disappointed. That's too bad. From her picture, she looks like someone they'd like. But if she has so many flaws, it might not work. Nicholas chuckled softly, then leaned closer to Sean and whispered something in his ear. Whatever he said wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. But I could guess it wasn't flattering. I was furious, but couldn't deny the accuracy of his words. Damn it. He really had me pegged. Unsurprisingly, Sean later politely declined to meet me. After that debacle, I made a point to avoid Nicholas. He clearly despised me even more than I'd realized, and it was best to steer clear of him altogether. But at Lily's wedding, fate wasn't on my side. Lily had arranged for me to sit next to her, but when I arrived, the only available seat was between Nicholas and their mother. Seriously? Were they fighting? Why else would they sit so far apart? Lily's mom adored me and always treated me like a daughter, so sitting next to her wasn't a problem. But Nicholas? I wanted nothing more than to avoid him entirely. I could already imagine him badmouthing me to my next date, she's greedy and a lightweight. Thankfully, he was soon dragged away by Sean for a drink, and I could finally indulge in peace. But no matter how hard I tried to stay out of trouble, disaster found me. I ended up drunk and of all places collapsed into Nicholas' arms. The worst part? My drunken memory was painfully vivid. I clung to him like my life depended on it, refused to let go, and when he tried to push me away, I grabbed him tighter. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, I kissed him. And not just a peckfoolin', passionate kisses. His lips had been soft, warm, and surprisingly pleasant. I'd even ripped his shirt apart and done unspeakable things. The real kicker? He didn't stop me. I snapped out of the memory, horrified, and quickly got dressed. I needed to escape from Nicholas' house before he confronted me. But as soon as I stepped outside, there he was, dressed for work, standing by his car. His expression was unnervingly calm, and to my shock, he even smiled at me. Heading to work? Let's go together. Great. 2 simple words, and had just told me 2 horror stories, together and work. I shivered, feeling a chill run down my spine. That smile of his was downright sinister. Lily once told me that her brother was extremely reserved, nearly 30, and still single, despite his wealth and looks. Plenty of women had thrown themselves at him, but had turned them all away. Yet here I was, not only throwing myself at him, but also kissing him and doing things. Humiliated, I kept my head down and said nothing. Nicholas, however, seemed in no hurry to leave. He leaned casually against his car, watching me with a look that made my skin crawl. After an internal battle, I gathered my courage and approached him. "I'm sorry," I muttered, scrambling to come up with an excuse. "I thought I ran into a wall." "That's why you know." He let out a cold laugh and began unbuttoning his shirt. I panicked, taking a step back. "Hey! If you're going to retaliate, this isn't the way to do it." He ignored me, opening his shirt halfway to reveal his chest. His toned muscles and sharp contours were stunning. Wait. Focus. The real point was the incriminating kiss marks and scratches covering his chest, evidence of my drunken rampage. "Looks like you were starving," he sneered. "You went to town on this wall." He stepped closer, his tone dropping to a low, commanding rumble. "So, how do you plan to compensate me?" "I'm sorry," I stammered, my mind going blank. What could I offer him? He didn't need money, and I had nothing else to give. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Nancy." Nicholas buttoned his shirt, his face suddenly serious. "I don't accept your apology." Feeling cornered, I gave up trying to defend myself. "Fine. What do you want me to do?" "Whatever it is, I'll do it." "Marry me." I gaped at him in shock, but he continued as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Marry me, and help me fend off all the women chasing me." So that's what this was about, a fake marriage, to get rid of his admirers. "Why don't you just marry Chase? You met her yesterday, and she's perfect for you. Plus, your parents would love the alliance." Nicholas raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the marks on his chest with a faint smile. "With all this, do you think I'm clean enough to marry her? Who else but you could I marry?" Before I could argue, he dropped another bombshell. "And don't forget you said some very interesting things last night. I recorded them. If you refuse, I don't mind sharing them with the world." What did I say?" My voice wavered as cold sweat drenched my palms. He smirked, his eyes narrowing with amusement. "Oh, just some little secrets that might make you scream." Frantically, I replayed every embarrassing moment in my mind. No. No way. Whatever he had on me, it couldn't come out. Judging by his smug expression, I probably cursed him out in my drunken state. After all, I used to do that for fun when I was bored. Weighing my options, I reluctantly agreed to Nicholas' demand, marriage. By afternoon, we were already at the marriage registration office. He seemed particularly chipper once everything was finalized, smiling like a fool. Clearly, watching his sister get married must have triggered some urgency in him. He couldn't wait a second longer. And now, as a married man, he was probably delighted that people would stop gossiping about him. That evening, he suggested I move in with him. I immediately refused. Living together would only make things worse. He'd see firsthand how lazy, clumsy, and messy I was, and he'd likely kick me out in no time. "No way," I said, shaking my head. "Not happening." But Nicholas was persistent. "How do you expect me to explain to my parents? I'm married but living separately from my wife?" Left with no choice, I reluctantly packed my things and followed him. After all, I was the one who had messed up first. When he proposed throwing a wedding celebration, I flatly declined. Weddings are such a hassle. Just look at Lily, she was exhausted planning hers. Plus, with us, it's not like anyone would miss the fact we're married. You can wear a ring, and people will get it. No need for all that drama. Surprisingly, he didn't push me further on this point. Nicholas' house turned out to be a modern apartment in one of the city's most luxurious buildings. It was brand new, clearly recently finished. "Whyd you buy a place here?" I asked, standing on the spacious balcony, gazing out at the city skyline. This was my dream apartment, the kind of place I'd always fantasized about. From the balcony, you could see the whole city, and on clear days, sunsets would bathe the space in golden light. But reality had confined such dreams to my imagination. For Nicholas, though, it was just a casual purchase. "I liked it, so I bought it," he replied nonchalantly. "Damn rich people. Couldn't they just colonize another planet and leave the rest of us alone?" Knowing I was living in his house and knowing his opinion of me, I resolved to tread carefully. No room for my usual messiness. He put me in the bedroom next to his master suite, which had its own balcony adjacent to his. Every morning, the second I heard his balcony door open, I'd jump out of bed and start getting ready. No more lounging around. When Nicholas saw me dressed and ready early, he'd sometimes quip, "What a miracle you're actually out of bed." It was true. Back when I lived with Lily, I'd often cling to her and sleep until noon. During breakfast, I tried to take on more responsibility. Once, I volunteered to wash the dishes, but before I could even finish my sandwich, Nicholas had already loaded the dishwasher. He didn't comment on my efforts, but he did offer to drive me to work. Oh, and he was absurdly generous with money. Whenever he handed me a check, the numbers on it were so staggering that I had to count them twice to believe it. At this rate, I figured, I could afford my own dream apartment once we divorced. Maybe even date a young, handsome guy after that. My future was looking bright. I was smiling to myself, lost in these thoughts, when Nicholas' voice jolted me back to reality. "What's so funny? You're practically drooling," he remarked. I turned my head to find him casually gripping the steering wheel with one hand, his fingers drumming lightly as he gave me a side glance. "Just thinking about handsome guys," I blurted without thinking. His face darkened instantly. I quickly backtracked. I was thinking about the advertising project I need to work on. Wondering what type of spokesperson we should get." "Not a man," he said coldly. "But it's a men's underwear ad." "Switched to 3 new projects after this one," he interrupted sharply. "Now, get out." The rest of my day at the office was overshadowed by Nicholas' scowl. I couldn't shake the tension, and as much as I tried to focus, his icy expression haunted me. It was unnerving, to say the least. Over the next few days, I started spending more time at Lily's house after work. Lily wasn't particularly close to her new husband, Mike, and their lack of connection left her bored and constantly begging for my company. Mike, the son of one of Lily's father's old friends, was tall, handsome, and extremely quiet. Whenever I visited, he was either playing with the cat or walking the dog, moving through life as if he and Lily belonged to entirely different worlds. For someone as talkative as Lily, being around him drove her to the brink of madness. She even complained she couldn't muster the energy to argue with him. When Lily found out about my whirlwind marriage to Nicholas, she wasted no time confronting him. "If you dare treat Nancy poorly, I'll make you pay for it," she declared. "Nicholas, I've always thought of you as my brother, but now you've stolen my best friend." "Nicholas, you know I've never had many friends growing up. You can't just take Nancy away from me." Lily pointed at him with dramatic indignation, looking as if he'd broken her heart. Nicholas let her rant, his expression patient, and nodded along as if agreeing to all her demands. But at the very end, he calmly uttered just 2 words, "Not returning." Despite her theatrics, my relationship with Lily stayed the same. We'd still lounge on her couch, chatting and gossiping like old times. As night fell, our conversations inevitably shifted back to our personal lives. Lily fiddled with a strand of her hair, her tone turning serious. "So, how's my brother treating you? Is he giving you a hard time? Back when I asked him to set you up with someone, he acted like the idea of you dating his friends would ruin their lives. And now, he's married to you? What changed?" I gave it some thought and shook my head. "Actually, he's been pretty good to me. He doesn't even seem to dislike me as much as he used to. Probably because now that you're married, he's too busy being your husband to be your enemy," Lily teased. She sighed dramatically. "I swear, Nancy, just a few months ago, you told me you'd avoid my brother at all costs. And now you're defending him? Love really is blind." I smiled bitterly. Between Nicholas and me, there wasn't a shred of love, only mutual convenience. Shifting the conversation, I asked, "What about you? You married a guy just so I could be a bridesmaid and attend a wedding. Every time I think about it, I feel so guilty." Lily shrugged nonchalantly. "Someone in our family was bound to marry for business. Nicholas refused, so it had to be me. Why wouldn't he do it? No wonder their family had been pressuring him to marry for so long, only for him to keep putting it off." Because he's got someone in his heart, Lily replied matter-of-factly. That's just how he is. Once he sets his mind on something, no one can change it. Besides, it doesn't matter to me. Marrying anyone would have been the same. She smiled at me. A mix of resignation and indifference. Just as I was about to offer her some words of comfort, Mike's voice called out behind me. Nancy, Nico's outside waiting for you. Mike's expression was far from friendly. With visible annoyance, he added, you should head home, it's already dark. Lily and I exchanged confused glances. I lowered my voice to a whisper. How does he know I'm here? I told him I was out with coworkers. Lily tilted her head, her gaze shifting toward Mike, who suddenly looked away, avoiding eye contact with an almost guilty expression. After picking me up, Nicholas said nothing, driving home at a leisurely pace. I leaned my head against my hand, gazing absent-mindedly out the window. My thoughts wandered to the person he supposedly liked. Who could it be? I wanted to ask outright but held back, feeling it was too personal to pry. My curiosity simmered quietly. But I didn't have to wait long for an answer. The next day at work, just as I was about to sneak in a quick nap, a sudden commotion jolted me awake. Mr. Biddle is on a rampage in the conference room. Someone shouted. He's been yelling for half an hour, not a single repeated word, and not a single curse. Who messed up so badly? He hasn't been this angry in ages. That man's arguments are bulletproof. If you argue with him, you're dead. Let's go. We have to see this. At the mention of a spectacle, my drowsiness vanished. I had never seen Nicholas lose his temper before, and I was morbidly curious. I joined my coworkers, sneaking along to the meeting room to watch. When we arrived, Nicholas was mid-rant. He slammed a stack of documents onto the table, scattering papers everywhere. I instinctively shrank back. His secretary, Annie, rushed over, shooting a glance at us onlookers before entering the room. She quickly gathered the fallen papers and whispered something in his ear. Nicholas paused, his sharp gaze briefly scanning the room. My colleagues and I ducked out of sight, holding our breath. After Annie finished speaking, Nicholas' demeanor shifted. He touched his nose awkwardly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The ferocity from moments ago melted away, replaced by a gentler expression. My sixth sense immediately kicked in. There was something different about how he felt toward her. Annie really is something, one coworker whispered. No one else can handle Mr. Biddle like that. Of course. She's been by his side for years. With his ridiculously high standards, only someone as competent as Annie could stay. You think he's waiting for her? His sister's already married, but he hasn't tied the knot yet. Wait, Mr. Biddle isn't married? Another asked. But I saw a wedding ring on his finger. Probably just for appearances. If he got married, it wouldn't be this quiet. Remember the spectacle his sister's wedding caused? There's no way he'd be low-key. Exactly. Wearing a ring doesn't mean anything. Look at Nancy, she's wearing one and she's single. Still. Mr. Biddle and Annie look perfect together. Such a stunning pair. Did you know it's Annie's birthday today? I delivered a file this morning and saw a gift box on Mr. Biddle's desk. It looked like it might be a necklace. As my coworkers gossiped, I couldn't help but glance back into the room. They were right, Nicholas and Annie did look good together. A pang of guilt stabbed through me. What if my drunken mistake was the reason he couldn't be with the person he truly cared about? Before the end of the workday, Nicholas texted me, I have something to take care of tonight. Don't wait for me, go home first. I replied with a polite got it and prepared to head out. Naturally, I tried calling Lily, but it took her a while to answer. When she finally picked up, her voice sounded rushed. Nancy, I'm busy tonight. Before I could respond, I caught the faint sound of heavy breathing on her end, followed by Mike's low, raspy voice tinged with frustration, focus. I immediately hung up, tossed my phone aside, and flopped onto the couch. Great. They were definitely busy. Lying there, my mind wandered. Nicholas was probably having dinner with her right now, wasn't he? Her, the person he actually liked. I wanted to call him, just to know where he was, but doing so would cross a line. We weren't in the kind of relationship where we kept tabs on each other's schedules. Still, why did I feel so disappointed? I kept telling myself to stay in my lane, yet I couldn't stop my heart from wanting just a little more. My phone screen stayed on Nicholas' number, my finger hovering over the call button. But I couldn't bring myself to press it. Lost in my own internal battle, I was startled by the sound of the front door unlocking. Nicholas was back. Seeing me still lounging on the couch, he held out a shopping bag. "Take this," he said, gesturing for me to grab it. Then, lowering his head slightly, he added, "There's a business dinner tomorrow night. Will you come with me?" "Me? Me?" I blinked in disbelief. "You want me to go?" "It'll embarrass you." Shaking my head, I refused outright. "I'm busy." Nicholas frowned. "Busy? Let me guess, you're going to see Lily again?" "No," I hesitated before blurting, "why don't you take Annie instead?" His sharp eyes narrowed as he leaned casually against the wall, crossing his arms. A sly grin crept onto his face. "Why should I? It's not during work hours. If I take her, I'd have to pay her double for overtime. That's a waste." "I'm taking you." I rolled my eyes blatantly this time. Typical capitalist. Why don't I count as overtime? Besides, he continued lazily, "it's a family event. And you're my family." Before I could argue, he pushed the shopping bag into my hands. "Try on the dress," he instructed. I spent a long time picking it out, and the size should fit. "You know my size?" I asked, peering down at the elegant dress inside. The question slipped out thoughtlessly, my focus still on the garment. Before I realized it, he had stepped closer. His gaze sparkling with mischief. Leaning down, he ruffled my hair and smirked. "Of course I do, I measured you myself." At the dinner party, Nicholas excused himself to discuss a business deal, leaving me to roam around the grand hall. As I wandered aimlessly, I unexpectedly ran into someone familiar. Sean. Holding a glass of red wine, he approached me with a small nod and raised his glass in a mock toast before taking a sip. "Nancy, long time no see." The memory of our failed matchmaking made me feel a bit awkward. "Hi, Sean." Despite his usual carefree demeanor, Sean looked surprisingly sharp in a tailored suit. He pulled me aside into a quiet corner, glanced around as if to ensure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "Listen, we know each other, right? And I'm Nicholas' childhood friend. Could you help me out with something?" "What is it?" He hesitated before blurting, "Could you set me up with Nicholas' secretary, Annie?" I blinked. "You like Annie?" Sean's confident facade faltered. He nodded, his face turning slightly red. "The other day, I went out drinking with Nicholas, and I got drunk. Nicholas had to leave, so Annie took me home. Later that night, I had a bad stomach episode, and she even took me to the hospital and stayed with me all night. No one's ever been that kind to me before." He sighed, looking genuinely smitten. "But when I asked for her number, she wouldn't give it to me." "I can't ask Nicholas, it's too awkward. Please, Nancy, help me out." I froze. Nicholas also liked Annie. So what now? Should the two of them duke it out? After a moment of deliberation, I replied, "That depends on you. Your competition isn't exactly easy to beat." Sean grabbed my arm, shaking it with urgency. "What?" I checked, "She's single." "Is there someone else she likes?" With a heavy heart, I nodded. His shoulders slumped as he murmured to himself, "Why can't that person be me?" I was about to offer some comforting words when a familiar voice rang out from behind us. "Sweetheart. There you are. I've been looking all over for you." I turned to see Nicholas striding toward us, his voice loud enough to draw attention. His sudden outburst had turned quite a few heads in our direction. He reached me and casually draped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me closer to him. Blushing furiously, I shot him a glare and hissed through gritted teeth, "Stop calling me sweetheart." Nicholas ignored me completely, throwing a sharp glance at Sean before steering me toward the exit. As we stepped outside into the crisp night air, He slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The scent of his cologne mingled with the faint aroma of red wine, enveloping me as he walked ahead, blocking the biting autumn wind. I stared at his broad back as he strode forward with purpose, shielding me from the chill. For some reason, in that moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for Sean and his earlier look of quiet despair. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, my mind spiraled into chaotic thoughts, especially about whether I should help Sean. I tried calling Lily for advice, but she didn't pick up. Just as I hung up to redial, a sudden shout echoed from outside my room. I sat up quickly. What was that noise? It sounded like Nicholas. Throwing on my slippers, I hurried out to find him curled up on the couch, clutching his leg, eyes squeezed shut. His trembling hand pointed at the floor as he stammered, "There's a big bug." I stared at him, utterly speechless. A grown man 30 years old scared of a little bug? But seeing how shaken he looked, I decided against teasing him. I grabbed some tissues, scooped up the offending insect, and flushed it down the toilet. Returning triumphantly, I brushed my hands off and smirked. "And you call me scared? Looks like you're the coward here." Nicholas, now back to his usual self, raised an eyebrow and feigned ignorance. "What are you talking about?" He really didn't remember? "You told Sean I was scared, back when you sabotaged our blind date," I said. "You heard that?" "Of course I did. And I have to say, that was completely unfair. Sure, I got the job thanks to Lily, but did you really have to ruin my chances like that? You messed up my love life for no reason." Leaning lazily against the couch, Nicholas shrugged. "He wasn't interested in you." I glared at him, unconvinced. He sighed and continued, "Sean's just looking for someone to please his parents. His family's notoriously strict, and he only agreed to date you because you fit their criteria. I didn't want you stuck in a marriage like that." "Why does that matter?" "I wouldn't have cared. It's not like you like me, yet we still ended up married," I retorted. Nicholas tilted his head, leaning closer with a sly smile tugging at his lips. "Who says I don't like you?" I froze. The conversation had veered dangerously off course. Trying to end it, I feigned a yawn. "All right, enough. Let's just go to bed." But Nicholas wasn't letting it go. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. His tone turned serious. "You're avoiding the question. Nancy, do you really not see it?" "See what?" "That you've misunderstood my feelings," he said, his voice unsteady. He grasped my arms lightly, his fingers trembling. "I like you." I blinked, stunned. "Are you drunk? Or maybe still traumatized from the bug?" "I don't look anything like Annie, you know." His face faltered, but he repeated firmly, "Nancy, I like you. And I don't know why you're bringing up my secretary, but there's no one else. It's just you. It's always been you." His words hit me like a hammer, cracking open a long-buried part of my heart. Light seeped into the space I'd kept shut for so long. Lately, I'd been replaying that drunken night in my mind, the fragments of things I might said to him. I couldn't be sure. But I had a vague memory of confessing to him. I always dismissed it as a dream, because if I'd told him how I felt, he would have avoided me at all costs. How could he marry someone who had feelings for him? It would have ruined everything. But now that we were here, I couldn't stop myself from asking, "What did I say to you that night?" Nicholas leaned closer, his eyes narrowing with playful intensity. "You really don't remember?" I shook my head. He sighed, almost exasperated. "You told me you liked me, and asked if I felt the same." What did you say?" His gaze softened, and he smiled faintly, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "I said I liked you too. But then you kicked me off the bed. I wasn't sure if you were drunk or just dreaming, so I didn't know if you meant it." He paused, his expression growing more earnest. "Lily always kept me at arm's length from you. I could never even talk to you properly. But when you confessed, even if you didn't remember, I thought, maybe it was time to try. Proposing marriage was my way of testing the waters. Would you have kept quiet forever if I hadn't pushed you?" He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. And tell me honestly, did you marry me for me or something else? I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, a bug landed on my hand. Screaming, I flailed wildly, shaking it off. In the chaos, Nicholas pulled me into his arms. When the panic subsided, he calmly disposed of the bug like it was nothing. Wait, I said, narrowing my eyes at him. Weren't you afraid of bugs just now? Ruffling my hair with a soft laugh, he admitted, I've never been scared of them. What? You tricked me? I shoved him away, annoyed. Mike asked me to stop you from calling Lily nonstop while they were busy, he explained with an amused grin. I thought I'd help him out. Good. Mike, you traitor. Speaking of which, Nicholas teased, leaning closer again. You were awfully scared of that bug just now. Does that mean you like me? Stop talking, I snapped, shoving his face away with mock irritation. No more words from you, love-struck idiot. That night, as I prepared for bed, Nicholas insisted that we sleep together. He claimed the house was crawling with bugs, and he couldn't risk sleeping alone. Wait a minute, I protested. Doesn't sleeping with me mean there will still be bugs? I don't care, he said with a straight face. You scratched me so badly last time, you owe me compensation. Before I could argue, he swiftly pulled off his shirt. Panicking, I turned to flee, but he caught me effortlessly and pulled me into his arms, my face pressed against his bare chest. I had no choice but to confront the evidence of my drunken mischief. The kiss marks and scratches I'd left on him were still visible, faint but undeniable. So, I asked weakly, how exactly do you want me to compensate you? I'm not sure, he murmured. His voice low and raspy. Why don't you start by kissing me, Nancy? Can you do that? I froze, startled by the husky timbre of his voice, and glanced up at him nervously. His eyes glistened, and he leaned down, locking his gaze with mine. Before I could respond, his lips captured mine in a kiss urgent, possessive, and overwhelming. His hand cradled the back of my head as our breaths intertwined. Without breaking the kiss, he scooped me up effortlessly. His voice, rough with excitement, rumbled against my ear. Last time, you took the lead. This time, it's my turn. One night of Nicholas' initiative left me with a sore back for 3 days. Feeling guilty, he made it up to me by calling me into his office every day for shoulder rubs and back massages during breaks. He even stocked his office with all my favorite snacks and drinks. I couldn't complain. Getting pampered while on the clock was my idea of heaven. I'd lounge comfortably, watching him work, until one day, Annie came in to deliver some documents. Her presence reminded me of Sean's request and sparked an idea. Later that evening, I cornered Sean. That time we went on the blind date, Nicholas told you not to like me. What else did he say? Spill, and I'll help you with Annie. Sean groaned, rolling his eyes dramatically. He said he liked you, obviously. Told me not to even think about it. You two really dragged me into your couple antics, didn't you? He downed his drink in one go and set the glass on the table, twirling it absent-mindedly. Seriously, when am I going to win Annie over? I chuckled. Your family isn't pressuring you to get married anymore? You've got the leisure to chase someone now? He sighed. Pressure or not, can it magically make Annie fall into my arms? I didn't answer, just smiled quietly. Somehow, the idea of Nicholas going behind my back to warn Sean off made my chest feel warm, though I'd never admit it out loud. Monday morning at the company meeting. I waited outside the conference room for Annie. As soon as she spotted me, she rushed over like she'd found a lifeline. Nancy, thank goodness you're here. If not, would I be in for another 2-hour scolding? Is he angry again? I asked, genuinely confused. I hadn't done anything to upset him this time. It's so strange, I muttered under my breath. Back when I worked in the technical department, he never got this mad during meetings. Now he acts like he swallowed a stick of dynamite. Annie blinked at me knowingly and sighed. That's because back then, you were there. He never lost his temper in front of you. Whenever he was mad, he'd lock himself in his office to sulk instead. Thinking back to my efficiency or lack thereof, I felt a chill run down my spine. If he'd let loose back then, he probably would have chewed me out into the ground. My thoughts were interrupted by Nicholas himself. Striding out of the conference room. He loosened his tie as his sharp gaze landed on me. The furrow in his brow softened slightly, though his mouth kept firing orders at the people around him. Grabbing Annie's arm, I quickly dragged her to a quieter corner to chat. I brought up Sean's request to pursue her, gauging her reaction carefully. She looked uneasy at first, so I immediately reassured her. He just asked me to pass along the message. You're under no obligation to agree. It's entirely up to you. Annie seemed thoughtful for a moment before shaking her head. I'm not interested in dating right now. I just want to focus on my career. She scratched her head sheepishly, her wide eyes sparkling with humor. Honestly, when I helped take care of Sean that night, it was just because Nicholas paid me overtime. Double pay. All I had to do was sit there while he slept. It was easy money. Then she added with a grin, Nancy, since I'm so career-driven. Could you convince Mr. Biddle to give me a raise? I dutifully relayed her words to Sean, expecting disappointment. Instead, his eyes lit up with determination. She wants to focus on her career, huh? He bellowed, slamming the table. Fine. Let's make it happen. I thought he'd lost his mind. Turns out, he really had. Sean dug up Annie's salary from Nicholas' team and immediately offered her triple the amount to join his company. Annie, holding the contract in her hands, glanced apologetically at Nicholas, who had been her boss for years. She gave him a small bow before skipping off, happily clutching her new employment papers. When Nicholas found out what had happened and my role in it, he cornered me in his office. His fingers traced lazy circles along my waist, his expression a mix of amusement and mock annoyance. You really outdid yourself this time, he said. Do you even realize what you've done? I shook my head. Not particularly eager to find out. You just poached my secretary. Do you know what that means? I tilted my head, waiting for the punchline. It means I'm mad at you, he said, voice low as he leaned closer. And tonight, you're going to make it up to me. I exhaled in relief. At least he wasn't asking me to fill Annie's role. But later that night, as I struggled to keep up with his punishment, I regretted everything. Being his secretary might have been the easier option after all. After the start of autumn, Lily announced she was pregnant. I immediately went to see her, only to find Mike practically glued to her side, holding her possessively as if to stake his claim. Be careful, he warned, his tone serious. Don't hurt my wife. Humph. I thought. You didn't seem worried about hurting her when you were busy making this baby. Since getting pregnant, Lily's appetite had grown voracious. Under her influence, Mike, who used to be a complete novice in the kitchen, had somehow transformed into a 5-star chef. As she stuffed a piece of steak into her mouth, she mumbled between bites, "Can't you and my brother have a wedding? I want to attend your wedding." How could I deny such a simple wish from my pregnant best friend? That night, I brought up the idea to Nicholas. To my surprise, he didn't seem too thrilled. He furrowed his brows, staying silent. I nudged him. He snapped out of his thoughts, lightly tapping the top of my head. Silly, a wedding is for ourselves, not for others, he said softly. I rubbed my head and pouted, grumbling, but Lily did it for me. She was already planning to get married, he replied with a smirk. She just made it sound like it was for you to tease you. I fell silent, realizing he was right. So, Nicholas asked, tilting his head slightly, do you really want to have a wedding? If it's with you, I murmured, half buried in his chest. Then I do. My words clearly pleased him. His lips curled into a faint smile, the corners lifting ever so slightly. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me closer as if sealing my answer in his heart. The wedding was set for the following spring. With Nicholas and his family by my side, helping organize everything, the process didn't feel nearly as overwhelming as I'd imagined. On the big day, dressed in my wedding gown, I slowly made my way toward Nicholas. The moment I took his hand, a single tear slipped down his cheek. I gently wiped it away, cupping his face in my hands. In a voice meant only for me, he whispered, I love you. Thank you for hearing me. I glanced at his hand, noticing he was still wearing the cheap ring ID impulsively bought at a roadside boutique the day we registered our marriage. During the reception, as we mingled with guests, Nicholas discreetly swapped out all my wine for juice. Raising his hands in mock surrender, he teased, "I can't handle another one of your drunken escapades." The memory of that wild night flashed in my mind, and my cheeks flushed scarlet. Obediently, I sipped my juice. While chatting with friends, I noticed Sean seated next to Annie. Nicholas, standing beside me, couldn't help but grumble, "Does being your secretary now come with mandatory wedding attendance?" Sean grinned smugly. "She's not my secretary anymore. She's my girlfriend." Annie shot me a playful wink, and everything immediately made sense. Later, she sidled over to me and whispered, "Thanks for setting things up, Nancy. This fool's money is just too easy to earn. He's paying me $10,000 an hour for tonight, and all I had to do was have dinner and pretend to be his girlfriend." She flashed me a cheeky hand gesture, her expression brimming with satisfaction. I mean, who could say no to that kind of money? I gave her a thumbs up, both in admiration and solidarity. As I glanced back at Nicholas, now laughing and chatting with his family, warmth flooded my chest. Surrounded by love and happiness, this wedding was more than just an event, it was the beginning of a life I couldn't wait to live. That night, I stayed sober. Nicholas, however, got drunk. He slumped against me, murmuring incoherent nonsense. Remembering how he'd secretly recorded me during one of my drunken rants, I decided to return the favor. Grabbing my phone, I hit record. But all he mumbled, over and over, was, "Baby, let's stay like this forever, okay?" "Okay," I whispered back softly. After that, I turned off the recording. Then, with complete clarity, I tore open his shirt, kissed him fiercely, and left my own marks on him. The end.